It was 6:30 on a Sunday morning, and my eyes snapped open long before the alarm. My mind was racing. I stared at the ceiling, my heart pounding with the same question over and over. How could I let this happen? How could I have jeopardized my marriage like this? Beside me, Nancy slept peacefully, her blonde hair spilling across the pillow, her face hidden in the soft pre-dawn light. She looked so serene, unaware of the storm I had created. Carefully, I slipped out of bed and made my way down to the kitchen. As the coffee brewed, I stood at the window watching the eastern sky brighten, my stomach twisting with guilt. Yes, I'd had fun last night, too much fun. But was it worth the price I'd have to pay now? It all started the Saturday before when my friend John suggested a simple evening, dinner and a movie. The plan was straightforward. We'd each contribute to dinner and rent a film. When we arrived at John's house, he and I ended up in the garage talking cars and drinking beer while he showed me the '69 Firebird he was restoring. Meanwhile, Nancy and John's wife Jill offered to cook and clean up, on the condition that they got to pick the movie. We agreed, cracking open another beer to seal the deal. Dinner was perfect. T-bone steak, baked potatoes, salad, and 2 bottles of excellent red wine. Afterward, John and I watched the baseball game while the women tidied up. When they returned from the video store, John had a pitcher of whiskey sours ready, and we settled in for the movie, a quirky 70s-era film called The Ice Storm. It was one particular scene that changed everything. A wife-swapping party, where men tossed their car keys into a bowl and women picked their partners for the night. It seemed absurd, like something from another time. But after the movie ended and the drinks kept flowing, the conversation took a turn. "What did you think of that wife-swapping thing?" John asked, laughing. "I doubt anyone really does that anymore," I replied. Nancy tilted her head. "You really think so?" "It's too dangerous," I said quickly. "But maybe if everyone knew each other well enough." "Maybe," John grinned. "So if you knew it was safe, why no diseases, no strings. Would you do it?" Before I could answer, he added, "Don't look at her. I'm asking you." The whiskey had dulled my judgment. "Well, it's always been a fantasy, but I don't think I'd ever actually go through with it." The room went silent. Nancy stared at me, her expression unreadable, and Jill's eyes widened, but John was laughing. "Have you ever thought about it?" John asked the women. Jill shrugged. "I've read about it, but it's just a fantasy." Nancy's voice was quiet. "I've thought about it too, but I don't think I'd ever do it." Then I made the biggest mistake of the night. "Well, we're all friends. Maybe we should try it together." I laughed, but no one else did. John seized the moment. "Let's do it next weekend. You in, or are you chicken?" Fueled by pride and far too much alcohol, I agreed. We even added stakes, $1,000 from anyone who backed out. The drive home was brutal. Nancy's anger was cold and sharp. "You think I'm some kind of cheater?" she demanded. "You better fix this tomorrow." The next afternoon, hungover and miserable, I called John, hoping he'd forgotten, but his words hit like a punch to the gut. "No backing out now," he said cheerfully. "We're both looking forward to Saturday." When I hung up, Nancy stood in the doorway. Her eyes burned with fury, and that's how I found myself at the window that Sunday morning, wondering how I'd managed to destroy everything with a single night of stupidity. "I didn't hear you tell him you weren't going through with it. I heard you say we're coming on Saturday. Why?" I told her it was about money. I said I was sorry for getting us into this, but I didn't know how to get out without losing $1,000. I needed time to figure something out. If I couldn't, we'd have to sacrifice the money. She didn't respond. She just walked away. The rest of the week, our house was silent. She didn't speak to me, and I knew better than to push her. I wanted to know what she was thinking, but more than the fear of losing the money, I was afraid of losing her. On Saturday, we still hadn't talked. Finally, at 5:30 p.m., I found a note on the kitchen table. "We can't afford to lose $1,000. I'll be ready on time." No signature. That night, she locked the bedroom door while she got ready. I showered in the guest bathroom. By the time I was dressed and back in our room, the door was open, but she was gone. I sat on the bed, overwhelmed. Suddenly, the money didn't matter. The thought of her being with John tore me apart. "It's time," her voice called from downstairs. She was dressed in a short black skirt, white blouse, black stockings, and high heels. She pulled a raincoat from the closet and slipped it on. Without a word. The ride to John's house was quiet. When we stopped in front of the house, I finally spoke. "You don't have to do this. Let me just pay him the money. We can forget this. I love you. I'll make it up to you somehow." For a second, I thought she wouldn't respond. Then she said, "I'm going through with this to teach you a lesson. Next time you make a commitment involving me, you'd better be sure I agree. Besides, when this is over, you'll give me the $1,000 because I deserve it. John's going to have a great time tonight." Her words hit me like a knife. Before I could recover, she was out of the car and heading for the door. John greeted us, leading us into the living room. Drinks were offered, but I declined. I wasn't sure I could even stand. The room was filled with tension. Jill and Nancy stood side by side, both stunning in their own way. For a moment, I had mixed feelings. If we went through with the plan, maybe I'd enjoy it. But the damage it could do to my marriage loomed larger. John broke the silence. "Shall we?" He handed me a piece of paper and a pencil. We each wrote our names, folded the papers, and placed them in an envelope. He held the envelope out to Nancy first. Her hand trembled as she pulled out one slip, keeping it closed in. Her hand. Jill did the same. "Okay," John said. "Open them and stand next to your date for the night." Jill smiled and walked over to me. She kissed me softly, but I was too nervous to enjoy it. "Good night," she whispered, stepping aside. Nancy then walked over, took my hand, and led me toward the door. Once in the car, she exhaled. "I'm so glad that's over." We kissed, the tension melting away. By the time we reached the house, the stress had shifted into something else. Over wine and soft music, we talked, kissed, and eventually found comfort in each other's arms. The night turned tender and passionate, and for a while, everything else disappeared. The next morning, I sat in the kitchen, coffee in hand, lost in thought. Nancy's presence was warm and familiar, but the weight of the night before still lingered. At 10:00, a car pulled into the driveway. Jill and John walked up the path together. Jill wore the same raincoat she'd worn the night before and carried a small plastic bag under her arm. We exchanged greetings, awkward and polite, the air thick with unspoken things. The night might have been over, but the consequences were just beginning. To be continued, part 2 coming soon, please. Stay with us.